All right, folks. So this evening for our wonderful lecture, we have my great friend, Jake Deckert. He has his PhD in exercise physiology from the University of Kansas. He did his postdoc in New York City, working in the salt mines, specifically doing some intramuscular signaling for, was it in neuropathy patients?
This one was spinal cord immunology.
Thank you. And
So
he's currently a lecturer in the Gonzaga Medical School and kind of the University of Washington. What do they call that? Kind of their district or I don't know, medical school system?
yeah, so I teach for Gonzaga University's Department of Human Physiology, and then I teach for the University of Washington School of Medicine, which is on Gonzaga's campus. So it's kind of a coalition, if you will, between the two. So that's where I'm at now, out in Spokane, Washington.
Awesome. So now what Jake also has done is he has been a competitive athlete in both Olympic lifting and ultra marathons, aka two very different ends of the spectrum, along with playing a lot of pickup basketball, and currently more into the not still cross country running, but also cross country skiing and rock climbing. And during the time that Jake and I both worked together when we were at the University of Kansas, Jake was a full-blown vegan while he was training and competing in ultra marathons, while he was also lifting weights with me and a couple other guys. And effectively, he was doing that while on a graduate student budget, so he'll make some, and he also has some food allergies he has to work around, which makes his vegan approach very interesting, and I would say probably the only one that I've ever heard of do it. And just talk a little bit about kind of how you got into the vegan lifestyle, what really worked for you to start off, and then we can talk about the wonders of your insane long distance.
Okay, yeah, so for those of you not named Mike Lane, feel free to interrupt at any point if you have questions, holler. Otherwise, I'll just get on a roll and go with it. So don't hesitate to just blurt something out if you want to know. I kind of stumbled into ultra marathon running. I've been, let's see, my first ultra was 10 years ago. Yeah, so their chat's open now. So my first ultra marathon was 10 years ago. Before that, I was just a half marathon runner. I've never actually run a marathon, but I realized you can't see my whole body. So I am built like a Tyrannosaurus Rex without a tail. I've got short arms, short legs, and a long torso. Was designed to be an Olympic weightlifter and not a long distance runner.
We tried.
And I did it for a while, and I just got too strong. So I had to go back to something that was hard.
You're not actually that wrong about that, which is actually pretty infuriating.
So I really just love running and love to be out in the woods by myself for long periods of time. And so I did my first 50K down in Oklahoma. And then about a year later, I got a text from a buddy on a Thursday night about 9 p.m. And he said, "Hey, there's a 40-mile race in town on Saturday. You want to do it?" And I said, "Yeah. Why not?" Got no reason to say no. So we didn't really train for it. We didn't train for it at all. We went out and ran 40, and it was a looped race of 20-mile loops. So at the end of 40, I asked the race director if I could go on and do the last loop and finish the 100K, and he said, yeah. So that was kind of how I got into ultramarathon running. It was more of an accident than anything. And that was honestly one of the best days of my life, just 14 and a half hours or 14 hours and 7 minutes, I think, of pure unadulterated fun. Met a lot of cool people, some people, a couple people who are still amongst my good friends to this day. And from that point on, kind of dove headfirst into ultra running. At this point, I've run something like 38 ultras in the last 10 years. 2012 was my big year. And, that was the year before I started my master's program. And we can talk about this a little bit more as we kind of get into the meat of the whole thing. But I based my training on what I read in books by other ultramarathon runners. And I don't know if you've read any books by ultramarathon runners. Dean Karnazes, people like that. The new David Goggins book, I think, is similar to this. I won't read it. But they kind of frame it as, I did my training this way. Why wouldn't you do your training this way? And as we found out later with Dean Karnazes, he's got some sort of genetic mutation in the way, I believe, the way he recovers or the way he handles lactate or something like that. To where he just doesn't do the amount of muscle damage that a typical person does. So for him to go out and run 30 miles after 15 years of not running is no big deal. For a normal person, it's a big deal. And I ran myself into the ground in a year or a year and a half. And you'll see that's not an uncommon thing with ultra runners. Some of the big time ultra runners like Anna Frost did about the same thing. She was the best female runner in the world for 8 months and then disappeared off the map for something like 8 years, 9 years. And, I ran myself into the ground, and knowing what I know now about physiology and having taken an overtraining class from Dr. Lane's mentor, Dr. Andy Fry, and, just talking basically ad nauseum with people like Mike and Matt Andre and Dr. Andy Fry about overtraining, what I ended up with was stress fractures in both tibial plateaus and femoral heads. So each leg, 4 total stress fractures during a 100-mile race. And I think some of this may be new to this talk, Mike. I've given this talk a couple of times, but as I go through and read more about it, I'm learning. So just 8 years late to the party. But, I overtrained myself going into it. I put in 115, 117 mile weeks, where 50%, 60% of that would be on asphalt, on concrete. And I didn't eat well enough, to be just brutally honest about it. I was vegan. I'd read a couple books about vegan ultra runners. I don't know if any of you have looked into ultra running. The vegan thing is big. And I think it works great if you have somebody who prepares your meals and, you have a chef or a meal prepper, as some of these professional ultra athletes do, or a team chef or something like that. But for me, as Mike mentioned, trying to do the graduate school thing, trying to be a runner. And at that point, I wasn't really lifting or climbing or skiing. I was just running. But even just grad school and running, I didn't have time to cook. And, in hindsight, I was not eating enough total meals, and I was not eating anywhere near the amount of fat that I needed to eat. Mike mentioned my allergies. I'm allergic to nuts, which makes me the world's worst vegan. So
if they don't find that funny, I'm sorry. They're just, I'm sorry. That still makes me.
Zoom classes are so hard because you get no feedback. Like, I can't tell if my jokes are landing or if everybody fell back asleep.
Once again, if they could be away from the keyboard, I don't care. That's funny. Told me like, yeah, so I can't eat nuts. I'm like, what the hell are you living on, man? How do you survive?
So it basically turned into a life of, I have a signature 3,000 calorie smoothie that I'll make, that has proteins and avocado and coconut and all that stuff in it. But you can only eat so many of those a week. And outside of that, it was pretty, relatively garbage. Ate a decent amount of fruits and vegetables, probably not enough. Ate a lot of chips and hummus, chips and guacamole. And honestly, just a lot of, I would end up replacing the fat that I needed that you would typically get from meat or dairy or eggs with just trashy fats, because they were easy to eat, and it was easy to sit down and eat 1,500, 2,000 calories worth of chips and guacamole, or crackers and hummus. And my caloric demand was high enough at that point. I mean, there were a handful of days where I'd need 10,000 calories. And I don't particularly enjoy eating. That's probably a topic for more of a psychology class.
Mm.
But I really get no, I don't enjoy eating. I eat so that I can run or so that I can train for whatever I'm training for. And so the motivation to eat was simply to be able to go out and run the next day. And it was much less like having a healthy body, running for longevity, that sort of thing. So admittedly, there were some mistakes made there. And I was vegan for 8, 10 years, something in there. I don't really remember how long exactly. I don't remember when it started. Um, so about 4 years of ultra running and then about 4 years of lifting, where I would go out and I'd run an ultra or 2 ultras, 3 ultras a year. But most of my training was with Mike. And we did mostly lifting and short, steep hill runs. So, over the course of the 4 years post injury, I had to take 10 months off from running after that race, because of stress fractures and some tendonitis that just wouldn't go away. In hindsight, that was, a lot of this again was due. I think that there was some damage to or imbalance of hormones and stuff like that I never had tested. I didn't know that I needed to. But it really ended up crushing about 8 years worth of running for me. And this spring I've gotten back to running, and, I'm really enjoying it for the first time since 2012. Volume's up around 30 miles a week. But over the last 2 years, I've run a total of 1 ultra. Haven't done much training. I've also been doing a dissertation and a postdoc. So those were kind of, I don't know, shouldn't be an excuse, but life.
Hold up. Now, when he says he's doing a dissertation, guys, Jake's life on hard mode. Just to give him context, literally how many hours you were in the lab every week during your dissertation?
The writing of my dissertation, there were some 22-hour days. I probably 130 to 140 hours a week for a while. My dissertation projects, for one of them, we traveled to Fort Leonard Wood. So that'd be like 4 days out of a week, every third week, plus taking classes, where I'd go down there and, we had to be on base on a Marine base at 5 o'clock in the morning, or at 4:30 in the morning to prep for the Marines at 5. And then I spent all day working samples and then coming back. So a lot of travel in there, a lot of lack of sleep. I am currently finding out how important sleep is to training, even in the day to day. And looking back at the last 2 years, it's no wonder why I couldn't get my lazy ass up to run. It's just, I've been tracking sort of sleep and nutrition and training status and how runs go. Not status, but just training quality. And, even on day to day, if I don't sleep well the night before, my training isn't as good that next day. Days where I teach, Tuesdays I teach 11, I'm on campus, I teach for 11 hours. So we're close to finals week, and it works great today to have, I give a final this afternoon and I'm done with a couple of my classes. So today worked well, but most Tuesdays I teach 11 hours, and trying to run either before that or after that has just shown to be too much. So again, I don't say that as any sort of excuse. There is no excuse for not doing the thing that you love. But it's been an interesting ride over the last few years. And, Mike has kind of introduced the training that I did. I power lifted with Mike for 2 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
About 2 years, where, we really got after it, and I put on a ton of muscle.
Well, you're squatting like twice body weight, because you were weighing less than $150, and you were pretty damn close to squatting. I don't know if you get 315.
I hit 305 weighing in at 144.
There you go. I was like, I was pretty sure you got over 300. I wasn't sure if you ever got to 3 plates.
And yeah, so hit twice body weight squatting there, and then I hit twice body weight cleaning about 2 years later. Just when Mike left, I kind of quit powerlifting, dabbled in running again, was too heavy, so I dove into some ollie lifting for about a year and a half, and cleaned 285 weighing 142. Hit it the next week, hit it a third week, and then literally just kind of washed my hands of Olympic lifting for no reason other than it got warm outside and I started trying to run again.
You're a jerk. Okay, just for fun, for maybe one of them is paying attention, but me and Jake, we actually measured it once. When he and I are both standing up with our hands hanging down at our sides, what was it that you had to pull the bar like 6 inches further than I did, even though
Yeah.
I'm like 3 or 4 inches taller than you are?
Yeah.
Because Jake's arms are that short for his height and mine are that stupid long for mine. And we sit down, you're legitimately taller than me by a solid amount.
Yeah. I think if we sat in a chair beside each other, I would probably be taller, but standing beside each other, you're 4 or 5 inches taller than I am.
Yeah, like the body type difference. When we talk about the Vertuvian man, we were two very, very so far at the ends of the spectrum. Yeah, you're Olympic lifting. Your snatching and everything else was just dynamite once you figured it out.
My Vitruvian man would be a weird shaped oval. But yeah, I love to lift and I would never take anything away from that. I enjoy it, but it makes it hard for me to run because it makes me heavy. It makes me fast. Up to about a mile or a mile and a half distance. Cleaning twice body weight is the fastest I've ever been, and it's the best basketball player I've ever been, no question. But for long distances, it's just the wrong kind of muscle and, obviously the exact opposite training stimulus. So, Gonzaga's rec here, it's really nice. You can ollie lift at the rec. And so I'll do an off-season block this year from October till the first of the year where I'll ollie lift. Because I do think it's great for, my races now are primarily mountain ultras.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of steep, 30, 35, 40% climbs for 2, 3, 4, 5,000 vertical feet straight. And I think the strength that you build ollie lifting, speed squatting, doing stuff like that is, very beneficial. So I will do an off-season block this year that is speed based. And then I'll move back into endurance as the first of the year rolls around. For races that'll start, I don't know that I'll run a race before April of next year, but that'll give me a good 16-week block to get some endurance built back up for that. So what all do you want me to talk about specifically?
So I appreciate you kind of giving context to how you got into it and went and developed. The first part that I'd like you to, because these are kind of my questions, but obviously, anybody that's listening, please ask Jake questions. I would ask professionally if Jake does not answer questions about me, but only things about himself, because Jake was always straight edge. I was not. So he's the one that remembers everything. And that's as far as that statement's going to go. So
I don't know what you're talking about. I only remember the good things that Mike Lane did.
Exactly. And I only remember the good things I did because the other ones, anyway. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about how, when you're going out and doing either training for ultras or legit doing the ultra. Actually, first, I want you to tell me Ankle's story.
Okay, so
I think it's freaking awesome.
I told you the 2012 100-miler stress fracture story. I dropped that race at 97.5 miles because I broke my ankle shortly after an aid station at mile 70. It was raining. It was dawn. So the sun was it was light, but you couldn't see the sun yet. and I was running through a creek and stepped on a big rock, and lateral malleolus of my left ankle touched the ground and ran into the next aid station. At that point, I was in 9th place overall out of 500 or so runners, and rolled into the aid station, and I looked at it, and it was the size of a grapefruit. And I made a huge mistake for this race. I had my parents as my crew. And so your mom sees that and she freaks out. And she's like, "Oh, you need to stop. You need to stop." And I'm pretty sure that this might be the only time I've ever cursed. No, this is definitely the only time I've ever cursed at my mother. But there was just an absolutely effing no way. And so I ran 27 and a half miles on that, thinking I had a rolled ankle. And I broke my ankle in 2014 and then again in 2016. And when they did the x-ray in 2014, playing basketball both times, when they did the x-ray in 2014, it's a avulsion fracture. So just tore some ligaments off the bone. And he looked at it and he said, "You've done this before." And I said, "No, I've never broken my ankle." And the guy was like, "No, dangling ligaments." And I said, "Oh." And so I realized 2.5 years after the race that I'd actually broken my ankle in that race. Ran 27 and a half miles on it during that race, and then went out the next weekend and ran 42 miles just for fun. And now we know. So that's the ankle story. It's one of the funnier things that's ever happened.
It's funny, but it's so fucking hardcore. Like, anytime it's like, God, I don't know if I feel like lifting today. And then I'm like, Deckert ran 20 miles on a broken ankle.
Yeah, it was so a little over a marathon on a broken ankle is a thing that it puts a lot of things in life in perspective. Like Mike was saying, I think about it all the time, and I'm like, God, dude, don't be a wuss. Go do this. You once ran like 9 straight hours on a broken bone in your foot. Like, go do this. Track work, not that bad. Running hills, what's one more? You don't even have a broken ankle. Go do it.
You're gonna, man, I don't want this to turn into too much story time. If any of them are actually listening, you guys should put in the text of ask Deckert about the running. Was it 14th Street story?
Which one?
Oh, with Jared. But if they don't say it, you don't got to tell it. In the interim, how would you fuel when you'd go out there for those long runs?
Okay, so they mentioned it in the chat, so I'll tell it. 14th Street is the biggest hill in Lawrence, Kansas. It's 138 feet from top to bottom at 0.38 miles distance. And it was my primary training hill there because it's the biggest thing there was. Again, these races that I run are trail and now only mountain. I don't do anything in the Midwest, really. All my races are Colorado or the North Cascades. And so I'd go out and just repeat this hill, and training for that 100, I worked up to where I hit that hill 16 times up and down. So something in the ballpark of 14 miles of nothing but up and down this hill that hits the steepest part of it's only about 14% at the top. But I'd go out at 3 o'clock, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and do it because you had to cross 2 stoplights. And so I'd go out there so that I didn't have to stop, because it's a terrible thing to have to stop at a stoplight on the way uphill and then restart your momentum. So I'd go out there early in the morning, and I'd go out at 4 o'clock in the morning for my last hill day before the 100 miler. And I ran past the predominant college bar there in Lawrence called the Hawk. If you've watched like the ESPN rankings of the top bars in the US, the first time up the hill, I'm running in no shirt. It's telling me my internet is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you went out for a second, but you heard you again. Your first time you're doing it, you're running up there with no shirt.
Yeah, so I got no shirt, and really short, like 2-inch inseam shorts on. It's late July, early August, so it's 85 degrees out before the sun comes up, and people are shouting obscenities at me from this porch by the Hawk. Very, very harsh obscenities. And second time up, same thing. Third time up, fourth time up. About the fifth time up, they start throwing black cats at me. And then the seventh time up,
not the animal. The firework, not the animal.
yes, the firework, not the animal, because it's the end of July. The seventh time up, they start shooting Roman candles at me. And that got a little out of control, but I just kept running. I hadn't looked at them or acknowledged them or anything at this point. The eighth or ninth time out, they come and one of them's calling me terrible names and says, "I'll race you to the hill. I bet I can beat you up." And made it 150 feet and was like, "F you, you effing whatever." So kept running, whatever. And by about the 12th or 13th time up, there were 10 or 12 people sitting on this porch, and they all came out to the street and they lined the street and they started clapping. And still a couple people on the porch. Well, my last time down, one of them hollers at me, and I go over and talk to him. And it's this guy that Mike and I have lifted with for years. And he was too drunk to know who I was. And I hadn't even looked their direction, so I didn't know who he was. So that's one of my favorite 14th Street Hill stories. Same kind of thing, but it's middle of the afternoon, and a couple guys from the KU baseball team drive by and calling me some inappropriate names. And one of them's recording me out the window of his car. My hills, and I go to tutoring. And one of the girls that I'm tutoring, I walk in and she's just watching something on her phone, guffawing, like losing her mind laughing. And the baseball team had posted it, and all of the athletes could see it. They'd put it up on Snapchat. So everybody in there sitting there laughing as they call this guy running in no shirt and shorts some terrible words that start with an F. And I look at it and I said, "You know who that is, right?" And she's like, "No, how would I know that?" And I said, "That's me." She got up and left tutoring. She just walked out. I thought it was funny.
Well, people suck, but man, the fact that the Roman candle shit, and of course it was Jared and those guys, because dear God, they partied hard.
Those guys raged.
Yes, I was very definitely not involved in that lifestyle.
That is 14th Street. I loved it. I ran that hill hundreds and hundreds of times a year.
And the funny thing is, when I tell these kids that like the hills on Kansas will mess you up if you're not in shape, and they think I'm just full of it. And it's like, no, like the JRP, the Campanile Hill, the hill behind Malott, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, those are shorter because I'm obviously not anywhere in your realm of aerobic work, but I mean, those things would get into us. I remember the one night you and I were running JRP, and there was with the sorority girls hotboxing it in the car in the back of the parking lot.
That was awesome.
They looked scared as shit because I mean, it was Jake and the Fat Man. So you run up the hill first, and then of course, like I'm a good 10 yards behind you because I'm not that fast either. And they just see, both of us showing up, sweaty and shirtless and also wearing short shorts. Needless to say, we got to keep our distance. Social distancing was built in that night.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I'm good at social distancing.
So I tell them a little bit about like the fueling strategies you would use when you go out for your real long training runs or for your actual, going out there and competing. Like what food choices would you do? I've never told them anything about how you would do things, but I always thought it was pretty interesting and I mean, pretty effective.
I honestly didn't have as much of a strategy as I have now. Like I say, the predominant sort of racing days for me as an ultra runner came before I started my master's in the first year of my master's, when I just didn't know as much about metabolism as I do now. Because what I teach now is biochemistry, cellular physiology, and immunology classes. So I I get to dive into this and call it both fun and work. But the goal was just eat as much as you can without getting a stomach ache every time that you go through an aid station. And, I learned early on, one of my favorite things was just baked potatoes dipped in margarita salt. And so there are pictures of me all over like my Facebook and my ultra running friends' Facebooks of me just leaving aid stations with fistfuls of baked potatoes. And I mean, there were times where I'd still be eating baked potatoes 3 or 4 miles after I left the aid station because of just grazing. So the nutrition strategy was more of just eat, 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 eat. I've always had a high metabolism, and, I haven't ever really had trouble eating food and training at the same time. When I first started ultra running, I'd go to the rec on Saturdays in the fall, and I'd go up and turn on a college football game, and I'd sit on a stationary bike with a box of Cheez-Its and 6 bananas, and had to eat the entire box of Cheez-Its and 6 bananas before the football game ended. And so that's kind of how I originally trained my stomach to handle food during exercise. And so I got into races, and, being vegan, especially, you're not eating food that really requires that much to digest. And admittedly, because I was allergic to nuts, I was eating primarily carbohydrates. And that's why I started eating meat again. Is I was at a 50-mile race, or I was crewing a guy for 56 miles of a race or so. And I'd been out on the trail for like 36 hours and realized I've eaten nothing for 36 hours but candy. That is not a healthy, there can be no way in the world that this is a healthy way to be an athlete. So I got back to Kansas, and I promptly started eating meat. So I ate a lot of candy. I was very dependent on sugars for my fuel. That's something that, like I mentioned at the onset of this, is rapidly changing. I'm not a keto guy. I think it has its places, but I don't know that it's definitely not for me during ultras. But I think high fat is, a beneficial thing for ultra runners and a number of other people. And the more I read about it, and the more, like I say, that I get into biochemistry, the more I become a believer, to use the Justin Bieber parlance.
Oh God. Like the whole train low, compete high, or at least have a portion of your training where you're specifically trying to be a little glycogen depleted, and then higher fats, you do get hopefully a little bit more mitochondrial density, a little bit more efficiency with your beta oxidation. And but yeah, I know, well, kind of like, and I know, since we know each other really well, like, you went, before you were vegan, it wasn't like you're doing, like, your chicken was fried, your meat was essentially a McDonald's cheeseburger. Like, going vegan was, part of it was good simply because your food choices improved a lot. And now that
Yeah.
you're back to being an omnivore, you're still bringing with it that idea of making better choices. And that's kind of the thing about hopefully being deliberate with how you eat, and that you slowly improve your caloric choices. And Courtney's got a good question for you.
So I'll address Mike's point, and then I'll answer your question, Courtney. It's really been a dynamic thing and an interesting thing to watch. Going from eating a garbage diet to eating a vegan diet, which a lot of people would just associate with being healthy. But for me, it wasn't. In low doses, it was fine, but over a long period of time, trying to be an athlete, it was not a healthy way to go, not being able to eat nuts. And now, that's really been to my benefit over the last year or so. As I've gotten back into sort of eating meat, and I've found a place that I'll be for a few years. My diet now is better than it's ever been in the past. And I've watched that pay off in training over the last 2, 3, 5 months. So it's really been an interesting progression. And like Mike said, it went from garbage omnivore to garbage vegan to garbage omnivore to slightly less garbage omnivore. Courtney, to answer your question, I've done a half Ironman. I did it with my brother. Um, I really like trail races, and I really like, don't know the PC way to say this, but to be away from people. So I love, most of my races are extremely steep mountain races, where there's only 40 or 50 people who even enter an event. I enjoyed doing the Ironman because I did it with my brother. I got to train for it with my brother. He's a triathlete. And I love duathlons. I think the swimming is boring, which is a weird thing to say when you love to be out in the woods running by yourself for 14 hours at a time. But putting my face in the water and having nothing to look at drives me a little crazy. So I did a half Ironman. I've done 18 or 20 sprint style triathlons. And then I've won a couple duathlons because running and cycling were kind of my thing for a while. But like I say, you don't see T-Rexes that swim a lot because don't have the body type for it.
To be fair, you do have the long torso, so that actually makes you a little bit more of a canoe, unlike my potato with sticks frame that isn't really designed to move well through water either.
My front crawl is just like my doggy paddle because my arms aren't long enough. So I love triathlon. I think it's a fun sport. I like to go to triathlons, the Coeur d'Alene Ironman or whatever it's called now. I'm super stoked to go to that this year. I'm going to go try to run an aid station at that. Well, never mind. That's a total lie because they're not having any races this year. But when they do have it next, I'm excited to go try to run an aid station at it.
Well, to be fair, ultra marathons naturally lend themselves to social distancing because of, once again, the lack of, it's not like a fun run 5K where you've got, 300 people all running in herds effectively sharing the same air. So,
There,
but
there's something that makes an ultra harder when when you're not bouncing from person to person.
mhm.
And I like that additional challenge. It's not that I don't like to run with people. I really love it. I love ultra runners as a group of people. They're one of the kindest groups of people you'll ever meet. But am I allowed to curse here?
Oh yeah, man, you go for it. This is
Okay.
us. I swear in front of them on occasion too.
Okay. I teach at a Catholic university, so I try not to do it, but it's a total mind fuck to be out there for 8 hours in the dark by yourself and to not see another human. And I love that. Just the places that your brain goes during an event like that is magical. It's the scariest thing that you'll ever experience. There have been times where I'm running at night and you just start crying. There are times that you're running at night and you just lose control of it. And there are times where you get so stoked and so happy that your feet barely touch the ground. I mean, you feel like you're skipping or floating. And the emotional ups and downs of that. I don't know. Some people call it the runner's high. I think that's overused, but whatever it is, the emotional effect of an ultra when you're by yourself or with one other person is so much more incredible than anything I've ever been able to get when it's me and, I can see 150 other people or 1,000 other people. That's a hard place to get. So I like the introspection of it. I like the solitude. It adds to the challenge. And yeah, no, I think you could totally do an ultra though. I mean, I think anybody can do an ultra.
Well, I guess we haven't really touched on it yet, and I think that's where some of the kids they don't fully understand it. Give them an idea of kind of what's the typical mile time, like mile pace in an ultra. And yeah, Daniel's got a good question of how long when you're referring to it. And then like when you say world record pace, how fast are those guys cranking out those miles? Because I think they're thinking like, the dude that just set the marathon record, effectively clocking them all at was it like a 4 something splits, where it's like you're not
Yeah.
at that pace. You are way cranking
Um,
from there.
uh, Sorry, I'm trying to look up this pace. So I don't know what it is off the top of my head. So an ultra is anything over a marathon. So ultras typically start at 50 kilometers, which is 31 miles. And typical distances are 50 kilometers, 50 miles, 100 kilometers, which is 62 miles, 100 mile, 135 mile, 200 mile, and then crazy. Oh, dude, I haven't told you what I'm actually training for. I'm training for the Iditarod short version 2025. Yeah, it's 350 miles over 10 days in Alaska in March. So
That sounds
that's
awesome.
where that's been the motivation to get back into training here. My ski partner is, he and I are training together for it. We're going to go out and try to do it together.
You're going to ski it?
It's on foot. So you have to pull a sled that has to weigh like 52 pounds because you have to have 10 days worth of food, fresh water, dry clothes in case you get caught in a blizzard. And so you can ski and run. So we will part ski, part run it, pulling a sled the whole time. And that's the goal. That's the new
Give me
challenge.
that information because I might actually think about it because you had me pull a sled for a stupid distance because you know my penchant for that.
Yeah. So 35 miles a day, and I'll send
That's
you the
not bad.
information. But it'll be a party, man. I mean, a masochist party. So
Oh,
an ultra
dude.
is anything over a marathon. I see that Mike Lane excited face.
Oh, yeah, man.
And pace is highly variable. You know, running a Kansas race, it's not out of the question to go out and run. You know, some of my faster 50Ks in Kansas have been, my fastest 50K was in Oklahoma, so it was pretty flat. And that was a little under 10-minute pace. A fast race for Eastern Kansas where it's pretty hilly would be about 10:30 or 11-minute pace. A fast Colorado race, you know, like the one I ran last year, the one I was going to run this year until they canceled it, is 50 kilometers, but you get 25,000 foot of vertical. So you summit effectively 9 13ers or 8 13ers and a 12 9er. You get, I don't know what it is, 4 or 5,000 foot climb or 4,000 foot climbs in there. And then like half a dozen 3,000 foot climbs in there where it's steep enough that your hands are on rocks, you're scrambling, you're pulling on grass and trees to keep you from falling backwards. Cause there are points where it'll be 50, 55, 60%. It'll be class 3 uphill. And on stuff like that, to finish the race, you just have to average 1.7 miles an hour. So your uphill miles, some of those will be 80 minutes to go 1 mile. So pace is highly variable. Training paces will be anywhere from mid fives to, I went out last weekend and I sent Mike a picture of a bear print that I saw last weekend or on Friday night. But I went out to do a Friday night overnight run of a mountain that's 3,400 vertical feet in 2 miles. So average is about 31, 32%. And I got 2,100 feet up, ran into snow, saw this bear print, decided I didn't want to be out there at night with that big grizz, and promptly turned around. But I mean, that mile, I went a mile and a half or so up, and that mile and a half was a 75-minute mile, or that mile and a quarter took 75 minutes. So it's, at this point, it's more mountaineering than it is actual running. Some bombing downhill, but you don't want to bomb downhill too fast because the eccentric, the muscle damage that it does is pretty brutal. So that's sort of, an ultra can be any distance over 26.2, and pace can be anything. What I was looking for on my phone is, in 2019, Zach Bitter set the record for, I think, both 100-mile and 12-hour races. And he did, both of those records are in the 5-minute range somewhere.
You gotta be kidding.
But no, but he's doing them on a track or a treadmill.
Oh no, that's not. Yeah, no.
So he's running like 400 laps around a track with zero elevation gain.
And
Uh,
with soft surface, and he never has to worry about any irregularities because most of the ultras that Jake's running, some of it's on gravel, some of it's on dirt. Like it's trails where you got to switch back. So it's not like you're just bobbing straight and down on nice smooth pavement, much less a rubberized track, which is even friendlier.
well, and a lot of these races now in the mountains are off trail. There's not a trail. It's just you have a GPX file on your watch and you have to summit mountains and you get there however you can. So that's why a lot of these races will only have 40 or 50 people enter them, because you're not on a trail. You're going through, I mean, you're going through waist deep grass. You're going through, you're scrambling on rocks. You're bouldering up stuff. You know, you take you're 10 or 12 feet off to one side, you get cliffed out. So it's a, it's a different game. Zach Bitter's the guy. I ran a 50K with him once, 3 laps, and he lapped me. I had about 4 miles left and I tried to good game him just because I thought it was funny and I knew who he was. And he was running fast enough. I missed. But, so yeah, now he owns the 100 mile and 12 hour record, world records.
Jesus.
But, yeah, so ultra marathoning is highly variable. It's a mess. It's a special group of people who run them.
So the next question I got for you of, obviously when you were being, the D-bag vegan diet, meaning your approach, not vegans or D-bags. I'm sure some of them are, just statistically speaking.
Just me.
No, man. Deckert's one of the few great human beings I know because turns out when you're not a good person, you don't get to hang out with a lot of good people. But when you were doing it, can you give kind of an idea of like what was your weekly budget on food? Like what would you be spending most of your money on and kind of how you broke that down? And it's obviously, that's way in the past, but whatever you can remember to the best of your ability.
You know, prime ultra or even prime weightlifting, like when we were training together, I was probably spending $200, $250 most weeks on food. Um, just due to the quantity. And most of that food was, this was 8 years ago. There wasn't a lot of available vegan proteins. You couldn't go out and buy a Beyond Burger or whatever. And you can, but they're still expensive. But they were outrageously expensive back then. And I'd buy like that protein crumble, and I'd cook 2 pounds of it, and I'd eat 2 pounds of it. And so you're eating a $24 meal there at that point, and that's without including the produce that you're eating. Thank goodness my mom has been vegan for almost 3 decades now. And her job is to be a cook. So like she runs a restaurant. So she'd come up, she lived 3 or 4 hours away, went to school at KU. So she liked to come up to Lawrence. So when she'd come up, she'd bring me some food. So credit where credit is due, that applied a little bit of salary relief. Made it more affordable to spend $250 a week on food when you see your parents 4 times a year and your mom brings you a month's worth of food. But so yeah, it was outrageously expensive, and most of that money went to vegan proteins and produce. A 3,000 calorie smoothie can be a $20-$25 smoothie if you're using frozen or fresh fruit for most of it. You're using orange juice, coconut milk. You're adding protein powder to it. You're adding vitamin C to it. You're adding whatever other vitamins to it.
Mm.
Those become pretty expensive pretty fast, but they make you feel awesome.
Well, I mean, this your energy turnover, like how much? I mean, that's what I remember you doing. If you weren't legit working or working out, and even then when you were working, half the time you were just eating. Like I remember seeing you just pound down potato chips like there was no tomorrow. I mean, you talked about that being your major fat source. Guys, I Dexed Jake, and I think one of those that I Dexed you, you were like 5 or 6%. Like you had veins on your abs. Like
Yeah.
you were pounding down all those potato chips, and you and I both know I never got that lean in all the years of Kansas. I'm like, this mother is pounding down potato chips, he could do his damn laundry on his abs. And I'm just, ugh. But
I don't I don't know who gave it, but I dexed it at one point at like 3.6% or 3.3%.
man,
And it was just, I mean, at that point you start talking male triad issues.
oh yeah, no, your energy requirements and everything, and that's with eating like it was a job. You were so
Mhm.
hard time holding that weight. I mean, it was just you and Wyatt were the two leanest guys I ever saw on that DEXA, outside of our other mutual friend who was using some assistance to be very lean. And I was just like, it's like, yeah, shit, at this point, you need to eat more, but I know you're eating. So it's not like you're just being a slacker. It's just, yeah, you're turning over so many damn calories.
Yeah, and that the primary thing that people suffer from with, are you guys familiar with male athlete, female athlete triad?
We've gone into it. We talk about the female athlete triad, but if you want to go into the male athlete triad, because honestly, I go over it pretty rapidly and just look for the big three of healthy, happy, and horny, and then kind of go from there. But you can go ahead and talk through your experience and obviously what you observed and give them the basics.
Well, female athlete triad, male athlete triad, pretty similar, except the hormone that's affected in females, you get the effect of amenorrhea from estrogen issues. In males, you get hypogonadism from decreases in testosterone. And, the main thing is you look at my injuries, you look at the broken ankle, you look at the stress fractures, and you say, well, duh, you've overtrained yourself to the point where calcium reabsorption is not working the right way. You're out in the sun all the time, but you're not getting enough vitamin D. Where do vitamin D's deficiencies come from? Deficiencies in fat consumption. Oh, look, Jake's not eating nearly enough fat. He's eating 3,000 calories worth of carbohydrates a day, 400 calories worth of protein, and fat as he can get it, 4 avocados or 8 avocados a day, and that's it. And, that's looking back now. Like I say, I didn't know any of this at the time, but it's no wonder that I suffered stress fractures. It's no wonder. Embarrassing piece of self-information here. It's no wonder I didn't go on a date for like 9 years. Just didn't care. Like Mike said, it was get up in the morning, train, go to work, find some time in the afternoon to do some sort of cross training, either basketball or rock climbing, go back to work until 7 or 8 p.m. a lot of the time, and then go train in the evening and go home. I didn't watch an episode of television for over 4 years at one point. It was just all consuming. And, it's like I say, that male athlete, female athlete triad, what you're looking at is you're looking at low energy availability. You're looking at low bone mineral density, and you're looking at hypogonadism or amenorrhea. And there they all were. So that's something that I have been working on here is, how do I get back into training and train myself to be able to compete as an ultra runner, or at least go do stupid shit like the Iditarod on foot, races of attrition. How do I get to the point where I can do that long term without suffering these negative effects? So it's been a fun little personal research project that's highly dynamic. It's ever changing.
But on the same point of it, I don't know. That's where I feel some of your conversation might be being lost on the kids watching now, or the kids that are going to watch it later, once I put it up for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that unless you've really gone out there and done those miles alone and had those moments of elation and had those downturns and like really understand, like, don't get me wrong, I've only done a marathon. I've never done an ultra. I've done a number of half marathons. Like, I've done enough cardio stuff and being out there on my own where you hit those moments like you feel like you can solve all of your problems in your life and like everything is awesome. And then other things, like it's a real interesting ride, and it's obviously not for everybody, but I think understanding it. And then I really appreciate you bringing up the male athlete triad, and talking about it. Because like I said, we do touch upon it. And I wonder if it's also a factor of your very low saturated fat intake. Because
Yes.
you do nuts and you're obviously not doing meat, so you're getting mostly polys and monos from your, avocados and from your other sources. And if that was really what was throwing that hormonal axis a little bit for the loop, but I mean, it's a very real thing. And you were at least one of the lucky ones where some folks, when they go arguably under fueled, now it could be any of the macronutrients that they're failing in, they start getting fatter paradoxically because they're losing lean mass, where you were at least diced up all the hell. So you would have thought like, I don't think he should have muscle mass unless he's got testosterone, but you were just that resilient. And the other thing is, because Jake doesn't like to brag about himself, that guy could jump up and touch rim. And we already told you about how short his arms are. Like, he's a powerful guy when he wants to be. And so, like, yeah, you push the body through the ringer. And I think, a lot of my major questions that I wanted to go through, but since the world has changed a little bit, and I'm not referring to social distancing since we last talked, and you were kind enough to come and do this in my class, and I greatly appreciate you doing that. How many people have asked you about the documentary, The Game Changers?
Dude.
What's your thoughts?
So many people, and I haven't watched it yet because I'm a hipster, and just like Star Wars, never seen a Star Wars movie. Why not? Because everybody always asks me if I've seen a Star Wars movie, so I'm making a stand and haven't watched Game Change. Wait a second, which one's Game Changers?
That's the vegan documentary on Netflix.
Is that the one with the world's strongest man?
No.
Okay.
Like some other dude that's trying to be the world's strongest man, but he's not that great.
Yeah, I watched something about diet and nutrition and being the world's strongest man, but I don't remember which one it was.
I think it was Born Strong, and they talk about like taking down like 15,000 calories a day, and like these guys pretty much have waking apnea. Like, it's just bad.
Yoke walk. The guy trying to do the world's heaviest yoke walk. That's the one I watched.
Yeah, that's Thorson.
Yeah. Which one is that?
That's Born Strong. Yeah, that's also on Netflix. And man, those guys, I do appreciate the fact that they brought up the diet. I do wish they would have brought up the pharmaceutical assistance also. So you really get it all laid out there. Like, this is everything they got to do every day. Like, it's a full-time job with a lot of side effects. And, good for you. You doing you. They're trying to make it happen. But that Iditarod thing sounds so freaking sweet. Do you have a sled you're training with?
Oh, no, we're not there yet.
I mean, God, I could be that guy dragging the sled around the neighborhood. God, my neighbors would hate my ass.
So you have to even get in, you have to do 2 qualifier races that are winter hundreds or more. So most of them are 135-mile winter races. So like I won't even start training with the sled for probably 2 years. Mm-hmm. I won't start training with the sled until my weekly mileage can regularly get up into that 80, 90, 100 mile range. Mm-hmm. Just because, I need that endurance base before I start to build strength on top of that. And when I do, it'll be, I'll probably train it into my hill days first, where I'll go out all winter and drag a sled up the hill and then let the sled drag me down the hill.
Well, when you say sled, like, this is a sled that should actually kind of like, you could not like sledding like down hills for snow, will it have that type of coefficient of friction? Or is it going to be more like when, you think of like you and I doing sled work, pushing and pulling the metal sled in my parking lot and stuff?
No, this is either a banana sled or a sled on runners, where you've got dry clothes, food, fresh water strapped down with a tarp over the top to keep the snow off of it.
Oh, so it'll be pretty light. I mean, it'll weigh 55, but it's not going to be the 55 metal on pavement coefficient of friction. It's going to be the 55 on wheels, so it's going to be more of a light pull.
Well, it'll be 55 on snow. Okay. So you'll be pulling the sled through the backcountry in Alaska. So you're not on a road for this. You're
Yeah.
You won't see it. The reason my buddy and I are doing this together is you won't see another person most likely for 10 days. You're sleeping. They've got little yurts and stuff set up, cabins out there that are just nothing but a wood burning stove for warmth. And so they map that out in the map they give you. And each day you go and you go until you find a cabin and you sleep in it, and then you take off the next day. But like, you're totally self-sufficient for those 10 days. And that's what's in the sled.
Damn. Oh God, I can't think of the dude's name, much less the name of his book, but he did Antarctica on his own with with doing a sled from literally one side to the other. And I was like, that just sounds freaking baller.
Somebody brought this up recently. I think somebody sent me a podcast and I haven't listened to it yet. But no, if you find his name, I would love to have his name, because I know somebody brought it up, but I can't remember. I think it was Sabrina, but I can't remember what his name was.
Colin O'Brady.
That's right.
Because I heard his interview on I think it was The Art of Manliness, and that just sounded so freaking awesome.
So that's my kind of racing right there, where you're really not racing against other people. You're not competing against other people. You're making decisions, and decisions lead to whether or not you finish or you maybe don't make it. I like that pressure. It's so similar to mountaineering. It's so similar to what people do when they climb Everest. But I'm a professor, so I'll never have enough money to climb Everest, and I don't want to stand in that damn Congo line anyway.
Dude, I think you just need to sell out and make that training program that, you can overcharge and underdeliver, because it's really just an ACSM cookie cutter, like a number of Insta stars do, but it's even actually will be scientifically principled. Um, we missed one question from Taryn, which she asked you, how many calories a day do you typically burn when you're training? And I'm betting she's meaning like on a low day, so you're just doing a little bit of lifting, and then a high day when you're doing the hard volume.
So the last time that I calculated, and thanks again to Mike, who made me a program to calculate my EPOC, the calories that I burn in the recovery period following exercise until my heart rate gets back down to normal. But I've been working recently on calculating my total daily energy expenditure, and looking at that, because in the past I've never calculated. I've just kind of gone by how I feel and when I get hungry. And I'm realizing that because I don't enjoy food, I don't get hungry often enough. I need to actually be eating when I'm not hungry. And so I'm working on calculating that accurately. But the last time I calculated my BMR was probably 2012 or 13, and it was 2,600 calories. So again, that doesn't include what you burn during exercise, what you burn during EPOC, what you burn just moving around throughout the day. So during 100-mile training, a low caloric intake for me is 3,500 to 4,000 calories. And a high day, I can get just a little upwards of 10 without getting sick. I calculated once that I needed 12 and was not able to get there. Got to 10.3 or 10.4 and was miserable. So anywhere between 3,500 and 9,500 calories is, dependent on whether it's a low volume day or a high volume day. And, to put that sort of in perspective, what a 9,500 calorie day of training means is, it means I went out on Saturday and I ran 50 miles, and then I go out on Sunday and I run 30 miles. And then I need to eat 9,500 calories to recover from that, because that's just a body trashing event. So that's, it's not a thing that happens often, but training for 100, it's a thing that'll happen every third week or so, 2 out of every 4 weeks, something like that.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, when it comes to that sheer volume of work you're doing on one day, you're one of the few people that actually gets to the literal limits of what their GI can actually process in a day. You're not going to be able to offset that amount of work output. So hence, you try to front load it, and then with what you can for the days leading up to, and then obviously really try to pay it off the days after, because you're just not going to be able to match that activity. Your average person, it's not that hard for them to eat a little bit more to pay off that one extra hour of activity, but 14 hours of pretty high output, which you can't really stop to eat. It's like if you look at, I think some of the Pasiakos stuff with the military when they were doing some mountaineering stuff, and it was for 7 days, and like their caloric demand, it was something like 7 or 8,000 calories because of the
Yeah.
exercise energy expenditure. It's like your average human is not used to eating that many freaking calories. It just becomes a daunting task, and yeah, they're just not going to do it.
Well, and I go out now twice a year to ski with Avery in Colorado, and 2 or so times a year to go out, hike, climb, run with Avery. And we talked quite a bit about this in our last trip. Your heart starts pounding so hard that you can hear it, but your heart rate will still be at 140, 142. So it's not even up at threshold yet, because my threshold will fall about 159.
Mm-hmm.
But your heart's beating so hard, and your caloric, like when you're going up steep stuff at altitude, the calories that you're burning are insane. So I'll go down there for eight days, and I'll come back 12 pounds lighter, because we'll go out and we'll push for anywhere from 5 to 9 or 10 hours in a day, every day. So you eat a big breakfast, you take some snacks with you, I try to make a point, because I'm moving to altitude when I go up there, and he's a professional ultra runner and I'm a bum. So I make a point to stop every 45 minutes and eat. But he'll do these 10-hour events on no calories, and it's insane to watch. But I'll literally come back 12 pounds lighter over 8 days, because I can't eat enough food, eating a big breakfast, a big dinner, and snacks in between. And so I've started I'll take sandwiches out, I'll take subs out, I'll take whole meals. I'll take mason jars that have 1,500 calories worth of protein shake in them. We created our own supplement this year, which is awesome.
Ooh.
Yeah, dude. I can only tell you guys what it is if you promise not to steal Jake's $1 million business idea that all of 14 people in the world will actually buy. But just melted a bunch of coconut oil. And you have to do this the day of, because it can't get cold. I think it'll work well in the summer. I'm excited to try it when it's warm. But melted a good chunk of coconut oil, mixed it with orange juice and cherry juice, and made it to a point where you could get about 400, 500 calories from 1 ounce of this stuff. So in like one big swallow, you could take in, 300 calories or so.
Jesus.
And it was just dense, and it's easy to swallow, and it's medium chain triglycerides, like crazy, which I think is, if you have thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them, Mike. But again, the more that I read into sort of fat processing and absorption and how it happens, medium chain triglycerides during an event are just something that I'm enamored with.
It's like anything else. You look there, at some point, there's the rate limit. You're just going to saturate out your body's ability to produce bile, make it into micelles. But MCT oils are able to cross barriers without using transporters, unlike obviously your long chain. So I think, like anything else, it's just as soon as you start hitting disaster pants, it's starting to give you that laxative effect. You've titrated too high. But kind of like I'm interested in the ketone body research. So you could throw, I would be interested in looking at a kitchen sink supplement where you do that, ketones, lactate, actually polylactate salts, because that uses a different GI carb transporter, fructose, glucose, but then you throw in some sodium as a symporter, for the glucose uptake, and then maybe some caffeine because there's a little bit there helping increase uptake with. So you throw all that in there, because I know you and I have talked a little bit about trying to do some long distance research effectively and kind of to failure with that supplementation, but that's just hard to implement. Plus, since social distancing, can't really test it out. But you know a guy if you ever need protein powder.
I
For
do know a guy. And dude, I am pounding through that last shipment. I appreciate it. I'm just crushing through those proteins. I love it.
Anytime.
One of those containers lasts about, I don't know, probably eight of these giant ass protein shakes.
Damn.
In one of them on, because I take them now over the course of I'll make a gallon of it and I'll consume it over 4 days because my training volume is not high enough to do the whole thing at once. Otherwise, I won't put that much protein in there. But yeah, I'll put
Awesome.
12 servings or so in there, and it's just bomb. But yeah, let's start a supplement company. That sounds
Hey,
like
you just need to get somebody that looks good shirtless. So if you know anybody,
I'm out.
a lot of
Could be,
brushing. Maybe we'll do a couple cycles of things, but then we'll say we're still natural.
that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I've always had back knee. I don't understand why people think it's something else. So,
hey, Jackson and Justin, thank you for the Joe Rogan thing. I just downloaded that podcast, so I'll listen to it.
nice. Yeah, that's pretty much all the questions that I've got for you. Nice. So, good. You got a question for Stephanie there?
Yeah, Stephanie, how many calories do I burn in a day with exercise and everything included? Again, currently average probably around 3,000. My bigger days at the moment are just sort of mid-teen distance runs on hills. So I'll go out for 2.5 hours, put in 14, 15 miles. But I'm doing it on gaining 400 feet of vert per mile. And so probably around 3,000, 3,200 on average. During 100-mile training, it'll be 5,000, 5,500 calories on average.
Awesome. Any other questions you guys got for Jake? Give me a few moments because I guess most of them are typing and they don't want to unmute themselves because God knows what's going on in the background.
Oh man, I know the Zoom game. Everything is delayed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, shoot, a lot of these kids, some of them are still living in their apartments, but some are back home with their family. So I imagine the joys of being with your younger siblings or otherwise while you're trying to be in night school because it's 5 o'clock our time. So I can only
That's
imagine
crazy.
the realities.
I haven't even eaten lunch yet.
Jake, are you supposed to be gaining that weight and keeping up that athletic performance if you're not fueling the beast?
No weight gain, just weight maintenance.
How much you weighing in at these days?
I really don't know. I don't have access to a scale because I don't go to the climbing gym anymore. When I left for Colorado, around 152. When I got back from Colorado, about 142.
Well, I mean, yeah, the sheer demands, and there's probably some dehydration effects also from being at altitude for you. But
for sure.
at the same time, man, like I'm at the point now where, yeah, same thing. I don't know what my body weight is. I just know certain things feel heavy, certain things feel light, and like
Yeah.
I'm probably a little bit lighter than usual, but for you and I, it's not like we're really trying to light the world on fire with something or really trying to make weight at a weight class. So it's like, as long as when I see myself with a shirt off, I'm like, okay, you don't look like a turd. Cool.
I just don't even bother taking my shirt off anymore for that, or I just don't have any mirrors around because I don't want my performance to be dictated on what I think when I look in the mirror. And so I really have no idea what I actually look like with my shirt off at this point. But, past training weight has been 130, or past racing weight has been 132 pounds. Current racing weight or racing weight this time around, I think will be 142 or 144.
Okay.
Just in an attempt to not hit that sub 5% body fat anymore.
Well, and like a
Um,
lot of these guys don't realize that, like, I mean, yeah, you're like 5'6".
yeah,
Yeah. So for Jake to be a buck 50, for like true like cross country athletes, you're almost like big compared to the other long distance runners, like
dude,
the good ones.
I run with a guy who's we're training a 12-week speed block. He's trying to break 245 at Boston in September. And so we go out and we do our track work and our hill work together because he's way faster than I am. But when we do track work and we're running 200s, we ran 200s yesterday, and I was thinking about this. I'm 5 or 6 meters behind him, and it has to look like I'm trying to catch him to eat him. I am so much bigger than he is. It's crazy. So I think people see us running out there and they just assume he's running away from me.
Sweet. It's
But
like, I get made fun of for being small and powerlifting and, strength sports. Same thing of, you catch hell for being big as a distance runner, but a buck 50.
well, and we ran into a group of high school track kids the other day, and one of the track kids said, "What do you do? Where did you get those legs?" He said, "You're not just a runner." But like, as I get more into mountaineering, these mountaineering people, I've been probably mountaineering for a year and a half now or
Hmm.
so, seriously.
Yeah.
And these people, and being in Long Island, it was just like 2 trips a year to get out there. But um, mountaineers are just thick human beings, and you don't really see it on TV. But like, I ran into Jimmy Chin a time or two at the gym in New York, the guy who filmed Free
Hmm.
Solo.
Mm.
And that guy's built like a brick, dude. He's got the Jake body type to a T. Um, Broad shoulders, not very tall, wide torso, giant legs.
Hmm.
Um, and it's been sort of reaffirming to see that, because again, mountaineering is my primary sport at this point. Most of my races are, if you're running 50% of it, then you're a pro. But yeah, dude, you put me on a road with road racers and I look like a giant, a short giant.
It's still like then you talk about specialization and you talk about, elite level athletes all tend to look the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the skin color, the faces, all those are going to be different, but the build tends to look pretty dang similar because it's
Yeah.
like for, you know? So, well, we'll be mindful of your time. I'm going to do a little bit of presenting on nutrigenomics for the class. You're more than welcome to sit in and be bored for a few minutes if you want, because it's going to be relatively quick, because turns out we don't know. But otherwise, Jake, I really appreciate you coming out, man. Glad to hear you're doing well out there and staying safe. And, you know, yeah, just send me a message whenever you need me to send you anything. And then at the same time, always feel free to come on back out to Kentucky. Yeah,
Well, I'm trying to come up with a trip where I can get back to like Lawrence and get out to Kentucky, because at this point I drive so damn much that Lawrence and Kentucky are just a nice, pleasant drive apart.
Jesus.
Um,
Yeah, it's just a nice,
but
easy 8 hours, 9.
yeah, I mean, like, I think I'm going to drive down to San Diego early this summer, and then from San Diego to Colorado. So
Oh,
that's going to be
cool.
2 stints of like 22 straight hours. So an 8-hour drive ain't bad. Um, but yeah, I'm going to just mute myself and listen to your nutrigenomics talk.
Yeah.
Um,
Feel
and then
free at the
sometime
same
let's
time, you
talk
can
about,
tell me I'm wrong.
yeah, sometime let's talk about supplements. Let's build a supplement.
Yeah, no, sounds good. I was thinking we're just going to call it, Menergy, and it's just going to be cocaine. Like, that's it.
Oh, well, if that's all you want, just come to my house. How do you think I'm getting through social distancing? 15 minutes at a time, man.
Oh my God. So now I'm going
All
to
right, guys.
share my screen. And
Hey, thank you all. Thank you all for listening. I enjoy doing this. So hopefully you take something from it.
yes, they're good kids, and we're same thing that you're doing with your kids of trying to figure out a way to make it work in this wonderful period of time where It is less than optimal, but we're just trying to wing it. So
Yeah.
Nutrigenomics, for what we're going to talk about tonight, is going to be relatively quick. And that effectively what we're looking at is the interaction between the foods that you're eating and then how that in turn is going to actually literally influence your DNA expression. So we talked about training adaptations, how we get that activation of mTOR or AMPK or PGC1 alpha and a number of different pathways depending on the stimulus we're putting in the body. Well, we're doing the same thing with every meal we eat. We're doing certain amounts of signaling for different processes in the body, which can be both possibly good and bad. So these nutrients, as we look at our happy little flow chart, are going to cause it changes in expression in our DNA, and that's going to be referred to as our epigenome. So when DNA is methylated, that is effectively putting it in a more activated state. Histone modification, meaning that we're going to effectively unravel those histones where your chromosomes are naturally wrapped around, so it's easier to go through and to the next page where we go to translation to RNA. And then once we go there, we have our transcriptome, which is literally all the RNA we have in our cells, which is going to then affect our proteome, which is literally the proteins expressed in our cells, which is variable. Some individuals actually have greater amounts of ribosomal proteins in their muscles, which in turn allows them to actually build muscle faster because they literally have, like the multinucleation, more factories. Well, they effectively then have more workers in said factories, so their production is even more so. Now, then that produces our metabolites. So right there, we've got cholesterol, and I think that's actually supposed to be, it looks kind of like it's supposed to be testosterone or estradiol. And then that is going to affect our metabolome. So now the interaction of all these proteins and our natural metabolism preferences for using fat, protein, carbohydrates as macronutrients for fueling. And then that then leads itself to productions of other end products. Where can we be in a situation where we have more or less oxidative stress? We have more or less metabolic stress. This could be the high insulin levels, high blood sugar levels leading us to diabetes. We can have inflammation, which I know is kind of the boogeyman out there, but in the reality, yes, we can have changes in the application there. And then obviously the way the stress is going to show up in our nervous system and how our body's going to recover from training, recover from the stresses of life, how we're going to learn, and then how our mood is simply going to be regulated. So we know overall it's going to have a lot of influencing factors on a variety of systems, but we don't fully understand all of these interactions. So we're very limited on how we can apply it, but we're going to at least kind of approach it. So just to start off simply, you have your genetics. Thanks to your mom and dad, you literally represent the about 1 in 8 trillion possible combinations of your parents' genetics. Now, some of them would have been way better than you. Sorry. A number of them would have been way worse. You know, there maybe was a couple Hitlers in there, but a couple potential Gandhis, and you know, you're somewhere on the spectrum. Now, from there, we can then influence our genomics by the decisions we make with our nutrition, with our training, with our stress that we're induced around in our lifestyle, and then with our recovery. So it turns out my body's default setting is to be fat. My body really enjoys being fat. I was 90s fat back when it wasn't cool. And I don't know if it's ever been very too socially acceptable, but it was far rarer of an occurrence just due to that era. Now, by working out, obviously, you know, here's where I'm at now. I'm obviously not the biggest, most jacked person you're ever going to meet, so I'm doing what I can with my own genes. Now, nutrigenetics is then going to be how is our health influenced by our nutritional systems. Now, there's some things that are pretty straightforward. I'm sure some of you guys have maybe seen a warning on the side of like cans of Diet Coke and stuff like this, where it'll say like PKU warning contains phenylalanine, and that's what's known as phenylketonuria. Those are individuals that literally are lacking the enzyme to break down excessive amounts of the amino acid phenylalanine. And that in turn is going to cause a number of negative health effects they have to be mindful of. Lactose intolerance is a very normal thing in a lot of populations throughout the world that aren't white. So understanding that, yes, those folks naturally are not going to be able to metabolize the milk, sugar, or lactose as they get older. So that has to be something that's either culled back from the diet or we have to do modifications like, cheese and other forms of dairy that are effectively low to no carb. And then how different intakes of different nutrients, so specifically a little bit of work has been done on some of the omega-3 fatty acids of DHA and ALA and EPA for its decrease in inflammation throughout the body. So the few things that we do know is there's a number of different things that we can take in from those individual fatty acids, to talking about some of the different bioactive compounds you're going to find inside of typically more plants, some herbal supplements and otherwise. We've talked about this before with like resveratrol, curcumin, sulforaphane, and how those are going to influence, along with vitamin and minerals. Some folks are not very good at conversions of different forms of vitamins. It's just not as bioavailable, hence the MTHFR gene that we talked about with methylated folate. And then some folks that are the saltier sweaters, so they have to be mindful of increasing their sodium intake. And then at the same time, the reality of when it comes to sodium intake, almost 2/3 of the population have really no effect on their blood pressure from a high sodium diet. Now, about 1/3 of the population will have cranked up blood pressure because of a high sodium diet. So cutting back salt for them is a great choice. But then about less than 10% of the population are actually paradoxically affected by their salt intake. So if they do a low salt intake, their blood pressure goes up. If they do a high salt intake, their blood pressure goes down. And that comes down to, once again, our genomics. And so you've got the research tools of looking at a lot of the molecular biological information that Jake has looked at, literally immune cell activation, proliferation, and effectiveness. I've looked a little bit at muscle fiber type, and then we both looked at muscle protein reaction to training stimuli, along with other aspects of muscle physiology, and then things like blood, hormonal levels, glucose levels, etc. So we can then look at our wonderful genetics. Now, the genetic code is just the blueprint. How we live and how we train is what part of the blueprint do we develop. And so that's when we're getting into those transcriptomics, which then is going to lead to the proteomics of the proteins we've actually built in the cell thanks to those signaling, which is going to give us our epigenetic expression. So it's going to effectively develop whatever we do have to its furthest abilities. And we already talked a little bit about the metabolomics. And when you talk about system biology, it's really kind of, once again, how the overall systems of the individual kind of physiology is going to function, which combines to nutrigenomics, which really is going to lend itself eventually to personalized nutrition. But this is in its infancy, and anyone that says they fully understand it right now is a liar. And that's okay, because we are really, really, really complicated. Go ahead in the chat, guys. Guess about how many genes there are in the human genome that make us up. And that's also skipping things like trisomies, where you have aberrations, you've got situations with like Down syndrome, Pateau, and Edwards, where you have trisomies of different chromosomes, and then you also have a number of different aberrations of the typical sex chromosomes. So you can have Klinefelter, which is XXY, you can have Turner, which is literally XO, and then you can have Jacobs, which is XYY, and then last term I heard it's like super female. That's a woman that literally has 3X chromosomes, which is kind of crazy. But how many genes do you guys think the human genome has? That's a lot, Courtney, and I do appreciate you throwing that out there. A little over, but Daniel is way the heck under. A couple hundred. Nice. I appreciate you guys all using real numbers. Dalton is so far the closest, but he's under. Okay, now we're playing The Price is Right. So I'll just get it done. So you guys, it's actually a bit over 20,000 genes makes up our genetics. And so, Deckert and I both talked about our limb length disparity. Now, here's the thing. When you guys learn about genetics, it's usually pretty simplistic genetics, where it's like, what is your eye color? What is your hair color? What is going to be your blood type? Things that are pretty simple, where it's just, I have this gene, which then gives me this effect. Now, when it comes to things like height, now we're looking at a wide variety of genes. So, I'm 5'9", almost 5'10" on a really good day. My little sister is physically little. She's 5'3" on a really good day, more like 5'2" and some change. My parents are about 5'3", 5'4" for my mom, and my dad's also about 5'6". So I got lucky in that somehow that combination of their genetics lended me an extra almost 4 inches of height over my father. Now, my sister, on the other hand, she got shortchanged and she was shorter than both of them. Now, whereas that's because height isn't just one trait, it's a number of traits. And we don't fully understand how all these traits work. So literally what we've got here is flatworms and their genetic expression. And then over here, we've got zebrafish of all of their genes. And then this is specifically looking at expression of a couple different proteins related to the neurological system of the organism. Now, that's for those organisms. Now let's come to humans. Each little line right there, guys, is another gene, and these are clusters of expression, specifically just looking at what's being activated when it comes to bone expression. That many genes. So, thanks to your genetics, once again, how you're going to respond to different stimuli, how quickly you're going to respond to those stimuli, and then all of those being influenced by a number of factors, food being one of them. So, come back. We each have our own natural food intake. And notice this, I like this slide because we have gendered effects. You know, I guess to be a male and be masculine, you have to eat cheeseburgers that are oversized and drive a big truck with truck nuts because I'm not compensating whatever. Which then in turn, those food choices are going to influence our epigenetics. So Jake does a whole lot of work, and yeah, putting down that much candy wasn't a great choice. But if Jake did all of that candy and sat on the couch, that's going to affect his base metabolism even more, affecting his insulin sensitivity, affecting the glucose transport around his body, which in turn is going to influence the transcription of different parts of his own physiology. Probably tell his fat cells there needs to be more of them. Tell his muscle cells there needs to be less GLUT4 transporters. Tell his pancreas that we got to pump out even more glucose because his blood glucose level, insulin, because our glucose level is getting to be too high, which in turn is going to be influencing that proteomics and metabolomics, which gives us this dietary response. And then it's a feedback loop of that in turn is going to be influenced by, notice, individual, social, and I like the term political response. Now, here's the thing. I'm sure everybody out here has given them shit at one shape or one point in time because of how they're built. And there's certain things about your build you can control. There are certain things you can't. In a perfect world, I would be 6 foot tall. My arms would be 18 inches. And there's probably some other physical features of like, oh yeah, I'd like this hair to not be going away. But once again, those are arbitrary things. I can't really control them. I can control my body size to a certain extent, specifically my body composition, my lean mass, and my fat mass. So I make my own individual decisions. You then have social pressures. I grew up in the 1980s and the 1990s when it was effectively Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, etc. Like, let's be as body dysmorphic as possible, which is obvious that it had a bit of an impression upon myself. And from there, obviously, being female is very different. What you're told societally when it comes to the amount of muscle mass that's acceptable to carry around, the amount of body weight that is acceptable to carry around, all of those are influencing further what our decisions are. And then when it comes to political response, obviously, there's a lot of shaming for individuals that are on one more further end of the spectrum than the other, meaning individuals that would be referred to as obese by body fat. And obviously by BMI, I get to catch it on occasion just due to my height and weight. And then on the other side, you can have individuals that are very skinny. I know some of you guys have caught some trouble throughout the years for being naturally very slight of build. And a lot of that is being influenced by your genetics. So what are some ways that have come up? Well, first and foremost is it's really interesting in that the intake of folate, one of the B vitamins, has actually been shown to have a positive effect literally on genetic damage markers, specifically on individuals that had specific DNA snippets, or single nucleotide polymorphisms, SNPs. And because of those individual different trait differences, some individuals, when taking a higher folate intake, will actually do a better job of decreasing the risk for things like different cancers. There's some research looking into literally individuals that have different expression of GLU27. It actually is going to have a major additive factor to risks for obesity, because those individuals are, for lack of a better term, less carbohydrate sensitive. Your ApoE4 and its cholesterol relationship is also going to be related to visceral adiposity, and then also things like Alzheimer's risks, because it's actually affecting your risk for developing tau tangles and otherwise. Selenium, the mineral, has been related to risks of Crohn's disease, specifically when you have a grouping of 29 different individual genes in a specific arrangement. And zinc, the mineral, has had the same type of relationship with irritable bowel syndrome with simply 4 different genes. So literally some individuals, and because we don't do genetic testing for every single person, they have an increased risk for both of those issues, and it could literally, the risk be decreased by simply giving them a greater amount of intake of these minerals. Now, zinc, if you're eating a lot of red meat, it's not really an issue. If you're eating a diet with a lot of vegetables, you should probably be okay. But if you're doing a bodybuilding chicken and rice, it's pretty easy to deplete it. Along with, when it comes to selenium, that's going to be found in things like Brazil nuts. So that's a good way to kill Deckert. And I like him. I don't want that to happen. So it can be one of those that's a little bit harder for folks to make sure they're getting enough of. There's also research showing the positive effects of increased omega-3 fatty acid intake, specifically EPA and DHA, and how that literally is going to influence the expression of different genetic traits that are going to literally lead to plaque development through the oxidation of low-density lipoprotein molecules. So literally, for a number of individuals, an increased amount of omega-3 fatty intake has actually been shown to do a better job of making sure that the endothelium is not just more vasodilated, but also has a lower clotting ability. And that's why some folks need to be mindful of also not taking in too much omega-3 fatty acids if they naturally have clotting issues in the first place, meaning underclotting, because then they can have issues with excessive bleeding. But your average individual can actually probably get something positive from increasing their omega-3 fatty acid intake. And in turn, individuals that have been, this study specifically, went through a modification of their own diet through giving them effectively a low-fat or high-fat diet, and individuals with the specific single nucleotide polymorphism literally were actually found to be more maladaptive with their HDL response to a low-fat diet, where individuals with the CT alleles actually had a much better adaptation to the diet that's low-fat, which is letting us know that genetics is an influencing factor. These are just single genes, and once again, we're the combination of 20 freaking thousands of them. So there's a whole lot that's playing into it, and we can't just say that it's the one thing or the other. So sadly enough, the only things that we really do know right now is the fact that a low sugar diet for nearly everybody is a good choice. Not that you have to go low carbohydrate, but complex carbohydrates, carbohydrates with fiber and other phytonutrients is a better choice. Trans fats, aside from the vicinic acid and conjugated linoleic acid we talked about in class, are pretty much a bad choice. You shouldn't be encountering. Eating a diet that's high in fiber and a lot of different forms of fiber is going to be a good choice. And then in general, making sure you're getting in at least adequate amounts of vitamins and minerals every single day, and freaking work out, because it turns out that's going to allow for better nutrient turnover and typically better health outcomes. Now, what's really interesting is there's a website. Oh, great. I now realize that it has your name up at the top whenever it goes through. So I will make sure to not show that off too much. She doesn't care. Okay, so this is some lady that I might know. and her specific genotypes. And so it's called Found My Fitness. It's a blog. She's got some pretty good information on occasion. They seem a little out there, but it's good. If you guys are looking for a good lay one for maybe to get to your parents as kind of ways to be a little bit healthier. And they also go pretty high tier with biochemistry, signaling, and otherwise. Her name's Rhonda Patrick, if you ever get a chance. And I think she's been on the Joe Rogan show, among others. So what's really interesting is this is specifically for just one single nucleotide polymorphism, where these individuals, notice, are going to have potentially some issues because of not getting in enough zinc because of issues with the transporter. So thanks to that gene, increased risk of type 2 diabetes, which means, once again, high sugar, probably not a great choice. Same thing, we got over here, slightly increased risk for Achilles tendinopathy. We got some collagen issues. That's because this person comes from a family of gingers. Sorry, bad joke. But the reality is, this does mean there's a slight collagen modification. So what does this mean for working with this individual? Well, it means, high contact combat sports, probably not a great decision just because the tissues aren't quite prepared for it, along with making sure that you're approaching things appropriately with whenever we talk about progressing. So we're going to decrease risk of injury. Decrease endurance capacity, resistance to aerobic training. Interesting. And that's because of, VEGF, Deckert, and how it's naturally being expressed. You're right, it's just one SNP, and guys, here's the thing, this is in its infancy. All this stuff right here is both coming out of this orifice and then a solid amount coming out of that orifice. So by no means should you give up on your life and no longer try to run ever again or lift ever again because you don't have the genes for it. The key is, like anything else, your greatest athletes are mutants and have all of the genes in order to be great in that endeavor. But if it makes you happy, then you should be doing it. The other side of it is understanding, what can we do in the now with the little information we have that's pretty much going to have no downside but only upside. So if we know that, if we go through, wow, another one for decreased aerobic capacity. Interesting. And then less noteworthy, normal ability to lose weight. Nice. Oh, they don't have information on your monocarboxylate transporters, which are actually really important for getting us to ship and remove lactate from the cell. Because Deckert and I still probably have nightmares about that stuff on occasion from having to learn higher tier X-Phys. So, but the same website is what I really like, is they have a lot of breakdowns of a lot of different health markers. And this is something that they're obviously developing further with time of, look at this, guys, genetics that are related to literally the circadian rhythm. So interesting. Increased risks of obesity, impaired glucose tolerance with late dinner time and early breakfast, and increased interesting. Huh. Morning preference for extreme snacking. Oh my God. That is amazing. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. So, interesting. And then there's things for health, cancer risks and otherwise, but the idea, like anything else, is we have all these genetics that are going to be thoroughly influencing, or at least having an influence on how our life's going to be. Now, just because you have an increased risk for this cancer, increased risk for this health outcome, that's based on research that is mostly observational, not a lot of interventional, and at the same time, it's based on the average American. And guys, who have I said before is the average American? No, I'm saying your risk is still massively increased. My wife did a good point of bringing up the BRCA mutations, and how that really does jack up massively your risk of Homer Simpson. Thank you, guys. So yes, if you have the BRCA mutation, it is going to increase your risk for breast cancer, both genders. But obviously, it's a lot higher risk for just being female for breast cancer compared to being male. But the thing with it is that's your risk. But there's always things we can do to decrease that risk. Now, some are pretty damn nuclear option, double mastectomy, hysterectomy, really shutting down the risk there. Others are things like making better nutritional decisions, exercise decisions, decreasing lifestyle stressors, and mutagenic carcinogen exposure. So not smoking, not drinking, making sure you're getting enough sleep, making sure you don't live next to a chemical waste plant. All of those things that we can control. Because it turns out, thanks to your parents or not thanks to your parents, you've got your genetics. And those genetics are influencing your life to a certain extent. But like anything, if we understand those risks, we can see, and especially as this develops and we can see the interaction of these traits and how these interactions might cause more potent or less potent overall outcomes, it's something that's really worth paying attention to. And kind of like when we talk about how the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting is still relatively it's still in more of its early research infancies, and it's only going to develop more with time. So I'm going to be very interested to see how, these outcomes and these expectations of these diets change with time. So thank you guys for joining tonight. We got obviously a great presentation, and thank you again so much, Deckert, for speaking to my class. That was awesome, as always. Any other questions you guys got for me? Otherwise, it is just going to be your final next week. Do your best, guys. Take your time. We're going to do it as an individual and then as a group, and you're going to remember you're going to take that by yourself. Once you hit go, I believe you're going to have about 90 minutes to do it on your own. And then same thing when it comes to the group one. I believe it's going to be 75 minutes to do that as a group. So kind of set it up according to whatever your schedule is best going to work out. So any other questions for me and Jake before we sign out, guys, and tell you guys all to have a great night and stay safe out there? Give them a few moments. See if they're going to say anything. When is the group final due? The group final, I believe, is going to be due, I've got that set to be due like on Wednesday night. So you're going to have a little bit more time. And yes, the final exam is over everything, but we're emphasizing the more recent information. And in theory, if the graduate students get me in their presentations via PowerPoint, I'll upload those and there'll be a question on the final. But if you don't see an announcement for that, don't worry about it because there's nothing to study for on the graduate students. So, with the hush falling over the crowd, thank you again, Jake. Really appreciate it, man. Stay safe out there. Keep that beard and that mustache strong because that thing looks sweet.
Thanks. I love it.
All right, guys. Have a nice night. Be safe. Bye-bye.